So in this video, I want to cover another paper written by Miles Mathis about the Tate murders. And I was flipping through his site. There's so many papers of his that are just mind-blowing. So I'm going to be covering quite a lot of them just because I need to go over them for my own research, and the information he brings up are just... I've never found this information anywhere else. This is why I'm really concentrating on it now. And Quentin Tarantino just released a movie yesterday on Friday on the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which covers the Tate murders. So let's go over this paper written by Miles Mathis so people can get all of the real information about the Tate murders instead of the Hollywood fiction. So this paper is titled, "The Tate Murders Were a False Flag and the Greatest Unknown Success Story of Project Chaos," written by Miles Mathis. You will best benefit yourself by keeping an open mind and forgetting most of what you have learned in the past. This is a quote by Jay Sebring. So let's get into part 1, the backstory. Of all the conspiracy theories I've run across over the years, amazingly this is not one of them. I searched the internet for anything on this theory and got nothing, even at above top secret and sites like that. But now that we know many recent tragedies have been faked in Hollywood fashion, why not go back to previous decades and see how long this has been going on? Before I start, let me say 2 things. 1, we will have to study the crime scene photographs of Sharon Tate, but I will make it as easy on you as possible. They aren't what you think anyway. I was apprehensive when I clicked on them for the first time, but I was very surprised. They aren't at all what we have been led to believe. Even so, I will lead you in slowly, making a strong case that they are fake before you even take a look. By the time we get there, you will already be pretty sure they aren't what they are supposed to be, and you won't be afraid to look at them. 2, I will also prepare your mind and eyes by making it clear why the murders needed to be faked. It will be much easier for a reader to understand how they were faked once he or she understands why they were faked. It turns out that with this manufactured tragedy, as with all others, you will have been getting disinformation from all sides. Only after thoroughly investigating the Tate murders myself was I able to see that all the dark theories were also wrong and probably planted. That is to say, the alternative theories for these major tragedies also seem to be written by the spooks. They either sidetrack you with Satanism and Crowley and LaVey, for instance, or they lead you in with a few pieces of true information and proper speculation before they divert you to the desired belief nonetheless. May Brussel was a case of the latter, admitting that the government was up to no good, but then preventing you from seeing what they were really up to. As alternative as Brussels seems to be, she never got to the truth. She always fingered the CIA, which turns out to be true enough, but beyond that, she was always in a sea of molasses. This could be because she was a poor researcher, or it could be because she was CIA as well. I currently tend to the second conclusion. If she had been onto anything big, she wouldn't have been allowed on the radio. The simple fact she was speaking out under her own name means she was wrong. She was allowed to talk because she was muddying the waters and still selling the main lines of the standard story. The CIA loves to have the waters muddied, of course. For instance, Brussels did an hour-long interview with KLRB in 1971, and she had time to talk about Greece and the Oda Frazier trial, and Tex Watson and James Earl Ray and Lee Harvey Oswald. But she doesn't say one word about Sharon's father, Paul Tate. She doesn't say one word about Lookout Mountain. She doesn't say one word about the faked photos. She doesn't say one word about Operation Gladio or Chaos. The link here is Italy, not Greece, as you will see. So her interview looks like more misdirection. Much of what she says is true, and some of it seems sort of semi-revolutionary, I admit. But most of it isn't to the point. 1976, she was still saying the same thing. She hadn't added anything to it in 5 years. Curiously, Brusel's 1971 interview starts out with a clue, either conscious or subconscious, I don't know. In her opening comments, she says, "In order to do that, control people, you disguise certain persons and send them into roles of influence. They become actors on a stage and they influence our minds in a way that is not real, but that affects a reality that will touch us later. And I will soon show that is precisely what happened. Certain persons were disguised, others were actors, and all staged an event that was not real, but that would be used to control our view of the world for decades." But despite recognizing that and stating it out loud, Russell then went on to ignore it, instead suggesting that what we saw was the truth. In the very next paragraph, she calls the Tate murders a political massacre. In my opinion, it is shocking that belief in this whole manufactured tragedy has lasted this long. It was so poorly constructed, so full of holes, and so absurd that I can't believe anyone believed it to start with. As you will soon see, the red flags were everywhere. Only the fact that the media was so completely controlled and that the public was so gullible could begin to explain how this was passed off as true. I like to think Hollywood and the government couldn't pull off such a hoax today, since, given special effects, the internet, and other advances, people are generally a bit more savvy regarding visuals. We can tell when things look fake, and the new set builders have to be a little more careful than the old set builders if they want to fool us. Unfortunately, it would appear no one has yet gone back to the files to pull this one apart. Although the Sandy Hook hoax fell apart within a matter of weeks, this Tate hoax has stood for 43 years. Before we look at the photographic evidence that still exists on the internet, easily available for any researcher like me or you, let us look at the history and politics that led up to it. The alleged Tate murders took place on August 9th, 1969. Those living through the events of 1969 didn't have any hindsight on the current politics, but those of us looking back from the year 2012 do. We don't just see effects, we see causes. From this distance, we can see patterns they couldn't see back then. To start with, the hippie movement was peaking at that time. The Monterey Pop Festival had been in the summer of 1967, and Woodstock would happen just 1 week after the alleged Tate murders. Note that. The alleged Tate murders were on August 9th, and Woodstock would open August 15th. Coincidence? Right now, you will say yes, but by the end of this paper, you will probably say no. It is also worth remembering that People's Park at the University of Berkeley, California, opened in April of 1969. Although the primary use of the park was a makeshift public garden, it was also used for anti-war speeches and gatherings. Due to the rising success of these speeches, Governor Ronald Reagan in May ordered the park closed and sent in the National Guard. Over 800 police and guards, given permission by Chief of Staff Ed Meese to use whatever force was necessary, attacked about 6,000 unarmed protesters, firing live rounds at them. One person was killed, one permanently blinded by buckshot, and hundreds injured. Although the university and the city of Berkeley were now on the side of the protesters, Reagan declared a state of emergency and sent in 2,700 more National Guards. Many more anti-war protesters were arrested as the city was under a state of siege by its own government. Reagan showed no remorse in defending his actions. He even passed off the killing of the student on that bloody Thursday as necessary. On the anniversary of the event on May 1970, he said, quote, "If it takes a bloodbath, let's get it over with. No more appeasement," end quote. He was also talking about events the week before, since Bloody Thursday was just a precursor to the May 4th, 1970 massacre at Kent State University, where 4 unarmed students were killed and 9 wounded by the Ohio National Guard. 4 days later, 11 people were bayoneted, at the University of New Mexico by the National Guard. And 7 days after that, 2 students were killed and 12 injured by police at Jackson State College in Mississippi. These deaths and injuries led to a nationwide strike of over 4 million college students, with more than 900 colleges closing. Reagan wasn't the only one crying no appeasement. In a televised speech that month, Nixon blamed the deaths and woundings on the students. In private, he said the students were pawns of foreign communists, and he set into motion an accelerated infiltration of college campuses via the Huston Plan. Wikipedia will tell you Hoover vetoed the Huston Plan, but no one believes that. Now declassified documents prove the FBI and CIA were busy countering all anti-war groups on campus and off. And they still are. Wikipedia even admits that on the Huston Plan page, where it says that although the plan was revoked, many of its provisions were implemented anyway. In hindsight, it looks like the only provision not implemented was the creation of concentration camps for protesters. As you study the alleged bloodbath that was the Tate murders, remember that quote of Reagan above. Also remember that the alleged murders took place in Los Angeles, California, not only the home of Hollywood and Reagan, but also one of the hippie capitals of the nation and a center for anti-war sentiment. Also remember that Reagan was an actor. Richard Nixon was president in 1969, having won the election of 1968 over Hubert Humphrey by only 500,000 votes out of 73 million cast. He won by 0.7%. But since Humphrey was part of the Democratic Party platform in support of the Vietnam War, neither party was against it. This is why there were riots against both parties' conventions in 1968. As now, the entire country was against the war, but both parties were nonetheless for it. The press, being run by the CIA, was of course for the war. So what the people thought didn't really matter, then as now. The press wasn't there to follow opinion, but to create it. Nixon and Humphrey had seen what had happened to the Republican contender George Romney, Mitt Romney's father, when he came out against the war. The press had crucified him. After that, all of the candidates kept quiet about the war, although it was topic number 1 in 1968, or it should have been. Nixon took office in January of 1969. Hoover was head of the FBI then, as he had been since its founding in 1935. Both Nixon and Hoover hated the hippies with a passion and wished to destroy them. This is now part of the public record, and we know it from many declassified documents. Mainly, this was due to the anti-war stance of the new generation. War was a big business, and the hippies couldn't be allowed to get in the way of it. It is known that the FBI created an entire mission around infiltrating and discrediting the anti-war movement. See COINTELPRO, which is not a conspiracy. It is declassified, it is common knowledge, and you can even read about it at Wikipedia. It ran in the 1960s, peaking in the late 60s and ending in 1971, we were falsely assured. The FBI was not just spying under COINTELPRO. Its stated goal, according to Hoover, was to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize any anti-war group, including hippies, socialists, the Civil Rights Movement, the NAACP, AIM, the National Lawyers Guild, and even Albert Einstein in the lead-up to COINTELPRO. The CIA had its own version of COINTELPRO, called Chaos. Again, this is not a conspiracy theory. It is now admitted by the CIA. It is known that Chaos was started by Johnson in 1967 and then expanded by Nixon in 1969. It was directed by Richard Helms and run by the notorious James Jesus Angleton. Nixon also linked COINTELPRO and Chaos. It went into its tightest security mode in July of 1969, the month before the Tate murders. The fake war on drugs was used for the same purpose at the same time. Seymour Hersh blew the whistle on Chaos in a 1974 New York Times article. Since the New York Times is controlled by the CIA, we must assume this was mainly damage control, the admission of lesser crimes to cover larger ones. One of the larger ones remaining hidden until now is the control of the Tate murderers. If Hirsch really knew anything about chaos, he would have known of its premier operation, successful beyond all imagining. But Hirsch's articles never once mentioned the Tate murders. This is why I say his articles were misdirection. They hinted at many things, but gave you nothing concrete. The hints all pushed you towards smaller things, which acted as further cover for the big things like the Tate operation. But let us back up. Note the quote from Hoover above. Misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize. Why have so few ever asked if the alleged Tate murderers might have been just another instance of discrediting the hippies and thereby the anti-war protesters? As we look back, we can see that no other event so discredited and neutralized the hippie movement as the Tate murderers. Due to the awful press Charles Manson and his followers gave to the hippies, the movement was dead by early 1970. The entire anti-war movement was dealt a crushing blow by the Tate murders, since the press used it to marginalize not only the hippies, but all the protesters and malcontents. This was a well-bought success for the government, since they were able to spin the Vietnam War out for 5 more years, spending countless billions more and enriching the already rich via Pentagon contracts. The Vietnam War didn't end until 8 months after Nixon's resignation in 1974. What day did Nixon resign? August 9th, 1974, exactly 5 years to the day after the alleged Tate murders. Famous author John Didion wrote, quote, "Many people I know in Los Angeles believe the 60s ended abruptly on August 9th, 1969. Ended at the exact moment when word of the murders traveled like brush fire through the community. This would apply not only to Los Angeles but to the entire United States. Given that the Tate murders did end the 60s and the hippie movement, we should ask if the Tate murders were intended to end the hippie movement. It seems very convenient for Nixon, Reagan, Hoover, and the Pentagon that the perfect crime should happen at the perfect time. It seems very convenient that the first so-called cult killings known in modern culture should occur as if on cue from the CIA, just in time to stop the rising peace movement. What a coincidence that the hippies would choose to go insane at just that moment, 6 days before Woodstock, murdering a beautiful blonde female, the perfect victim in any tragedy. See the fake Jessica Lynch rescue for a later example. Still pregnant with a child, the other perfect victim. What a coincidence that they should write anti-government slogans on the wall like "Death to Pigs." What a coincidence that their leader should be the perfect patsy, a serial jailbird who had asked to be sent back to jail. That's right, Manson didn't want to be released from jail in 1967. Tom Snyder even admitted that on TV in 1981. How convenient that the government set up somebody who wanted to be set up, sending a man back to jail for life who wanted to go back to jail. Let me put it this way. If the FBI were looking for somebody to be a patsy, they could not have found someone better than Manson. He had a wild-eyed look, played the guitar, and sang like the hippies, wore his hair long, was a lifetime criminal, and wanted to go back to jail. How convenient. What we will see is that Manson was actually working for the FBI and CIA all along. He wasn't set up. He was another actor, a willing patsy, playing the part he had been hired to play. He was actually the most brilliant actor of all of them, and still is. A few readers will say I'm just following Mae Brussels' script so far, and Brussels didn't touch on some of these points above. But this is where I jet past her. I say that Manson was just one more actor, because all the top parts were played by actors. We already know that. Sharon Tate was an actor. Her career started in 1965 with the movie Eye of the Devil, a movie about devil worship and sacrificial murders, where Sharon plays a witch. More recently, she had played a vampire in The Fearless Vampire Killers. Then she played a slut in The Valley of the Dolls. One who has an abortion, becomes a softcore porn actress, and then kills herself with downers. Then she had a bit part in Rosemary's Baby. Curious how all these films have to do with babies, blood, and death. In the Manson murders, she was just continuing a trend. You might say she was typecast. The same can be said for Roman Polanski. He was the director of Fearless Vampire Killers and Rosemary's Baby, and he was one of the leads in the former, becoming a vampire at the end. If the FBI had been looking for somebody to direct a satanic slasher film, they could not have found a more perfect candidate. Does anyone but me find that to be a big red flag? The murder takes place in the home of a director of satanic murder films, and actors are murdered? No one thought that was suspicious? In 1963, Polanski directed an episode for a Dutch movie entitled The Best Swindles in the World. As you will see, the alleged Tate murders rank very high in that category. Jay Sebring, one of the other alleged victims, was also an actor. He was better known for his hair salons for men, but in 1969 he was an actor. He had a part in a Batman episode that year. He had been in the underground film Mondo Hollywood. He was also a friend of producer Bill Dozier. And they together started the career of Bruce Lee, who was an actor. Sebring had been in the Navy for 4 years, according to his bio. This fact may be important in what we are about to discover, since Sebring's military contacts were about to come in useful to him. It is also possible he was still working for naval intelligence in 1969, though I don't believe anyone before me has suggested that. Also curious that Sebring's business did not fail with his alleged death, despite the fact that he had not sold it or made any plans for its continuation. There is absolutely no information about this on the internet, with the encyclopedia entries on Sebring International being nothing but stubs. Among the famous salon clients of Sebring were Frank Sinatra and Jim Morrison. We will see more of Morrison below. That is supposed to be Sebring's next of kin, his nephew Anthony DeMaria. Looks a lot like an actor, doesn't he? That's because he is. Look him up at IMDb. He has no age posted on the internet, and his acting career didn't start until the 1990s. He also didn't get involved with the parole hearings until the 1990s, which is strange. In a well-known blog, TateLaBianca.blogspot.com, we find this 2006 post from Colonel Scott. Quote, I met Jay's nephew one afternoon 18 years ago at the USC Special Collection Library. He did not even know the details of his uncle's murder. I had to turn him on to the Helter Skelter novel because that was all I knew at the time. Now he remains the only next of kin on the Sebring side to ever attend a parole hearing. And even then, he only did decades after the murder. End quote. Curious. More actors involved. They don't seem to be trying very hard to create a believable story, but they are continuing to scrub a lot of things, such as the Sebring documentary DeMaria did in 2009. Although Dennis Hopper was in it, and DeMaria is listed as the director, it isn't on Hopper's IMDb page or DeMaria's. At IMDb, that photo is tagged Anthony DeMario and Dennis Hopper while filming Sebring. But there is no listing for that documentary on IMDb and no listing on DeMaria's page. I assume the documentary was created as propaganda, but it must have been very unsuccessful propaganda, perhaps even divulging some real information. The spooks had to scrub it as soon as it hit the world. Speaking of Hopper, he is the one who spoke out to the Los Angeles Times back in 1969 saying, quote, "They, at the Tate house, had fallen into sadism and masochism and bestiality, and they recorded it all on videotape too. The LA police told me this. I know that 3 days before they were killed, 25 people were invited to that house for a mass whipping of a dealer from Sunset Strip who'd given them bad dope." End quote. That is clearly planted information or disinformation. Notice that Hopper even admits the information was planted on him by the LA police. Was Hopper the mouthpiece of the LA police, and if so, why? Can't the police do their own press conference? This is your red flag for Hopper in this paper. That and the fact that Hopper admits his father was in intelligence. Like father, like son. But back to the claims of satanic activity. This is a common ploy used by the CIA and FBI to lead investigators into dark alleys. Long ago, I learned that anytime I am being led into Satanism, Crowley, LaVey, and similar channels, I should know that the CIA is trying to divert me. It isn't Satanists that are running these events, it is most often military intelligence. But the black agencies use Satanism to cover their tracks. For most researchers, Satanism is a sexier road than the road to G-Men, and they willingly take it. Rule number 1 in researching false flag events: ignore all links that lead to Satanism. Those are sucker links, put there on purpose by the CIA writers. As one example, let us dispense with the Satanic Process Church without further ado. The only thing you need to know about the Process Church is that in 1966, the leaders of the cult, the De Grimstones, secured a large property on the Yucatan Peninsula. Guess where? Merida. In 1970, that wasn't the red flag it is now. It is now known that Merida is the CIA's home away from home, sort of a Mexican Langley. Newer books on Manson or the Process Church now scrub that reference, telling you the hangout of the De Grimstones was the scarier sounding town of Extol. But Extol wasn't and isn't a town. It is just a makeshift CIA ranch on the outskirts of Merida. As proof of that, I send you to the documents leaked by Edward Snowden and Glenn Greenwald concerning psychology gambits used by secret government agencies to control and steer opinion on the internet. One of the documents they leaked was this one. Notice how it says near the top, magic. It is in the category anthropology, and that category also includes deception. It is near the categories of psychology and influence. This is not the magic of the ancient wizards or even the golden bow. This is modern magic of the rabbit in a hat sort. It is deception with no spiritual component. It is like a mystery in which the real perpetrator has been hidden from you permanently. We know from Operation Gladio that all the European secret services are linked to the US Secret Service, and they often worked together. The Process Church came out of Mayfair, London, so we may assume it is MI6. The MI6 has been using the Crowley Satanism cover since the 1890s. The fake De Grimstones are just actors from the theatrical division of MI6. Whenever the Secret Services need to create cover, they send in people like this. They work all over the world, and one Secret Service is happy to borrow actors and agents from other Secret Services. But back to Jay Sebring. There is some very important information in this post. Jay Sebring, president of a record company. The poster doesn't tell us what paper that is from, so we can't confirm it. He only says it is from 1965. Looks like Terry Melcher wasn't the only one in the recording business. The web of contacts Sebring actually had is beginning to get fleshed out, and we can only ask why this fact has been scrubbed from the web and the rest of the world. A lot of people don't want you to know anything about Jay Sebring except that he cut hair. If Sebring were just a hairstylist, why would his bio need to be scrubbed? Wojciech Frykowski, another alleged victim, was educated exclusively at the film school in Poland. He had a part in Polanski's early film Mammals, which he also financed and produced. His younger brother, Jerry Frykowski, is a movie production manager well known in Europe. Frykowski's son, Bartłomiej, also became a cinematographer. Frykowski was hoping Polanski would get him a job in the movie industry in Los Angeles, which we will see he did in a way. You will learn much more about Frykowski below. Abigail Folger, another alleged victim, wasn't an actress as far as I know, but as an heiress to the Folgers coffee family, she was connected to top political people including the Kennedys. She had worked on Robert Kennedy's campaign in 1968, and, as you will remember, he was also killed in very mysterious circumstances. His death was filmed. The wounds and gunshots never matched. The photos were faked. The murderer was a patsy and we saw no body. His father, Joseph Kennedy, owned RKO Studios before the war, so he was also in the business. Joseph wasn't just a director or producer, he was a studio owner and manager. These people were always producing some event, and it wasn't always on a stage in Hollywood. Another coincidence, Bobby Kennedy had dinner at a Malibu beach house on June 5, 1968, before being driven to the Ambassador Hotel where he was allegedly shot and killed. Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski were also present at that dinner party in Malibu. Hopefully, you may understand by the end of this paper why and how that wasn't a coincidence. When Manson lived in San Francisco, Abigail Folger loaned $10,000 to the Straight Theater at Haight and Cole Streets. Note that theater. Folger was involved with actors and giving them money. Manson then lived on Cole Street, on the same block as the Process Church. Fast forward to LA, where Manson and Folger met at the house of Cass Elliot. Some have said that Folger loaned money to Manson, and if these things are true, Folger looks like one of the private funders of the entire operation. Folger is also said to have given money to Timothy Leary, the underground filmmaker, Kenneth Anger, and the Himalayan Academy, which was located not far from the Esalen Institute. All that is suggestive, but the biggest red flag in this whole charade is that Sharon Tate's father, Paul Tate, was a colonel in Army intelligence. That rank is just under general. They don't tell us exactly in what capacity he served, of course, but they do admit he served for 23 years, supposedly ending in 1969. So he started in 1946. Interestingly, that is when Army intelligence was split into various departments, including the CIA. Yes, the CIA started in 1947. In 1959, the Tates moved to Verona, Italy, where Paul Tate was stationed at Passaquac, the headquarters for SETAF, Southern European Task Force. This links him to Operation Gladio. General Malidi, commander of Italian military intelligence at the time of the Tate murders, later testified in court that the CIA had been involved in many false flag operations in Italy and Europe, including murders and bombings, for the purpose of creating an Italian nationalism that was capable of halting what it saw as a slide to the left. Sound familiar? Maletti added, quote, "Don't forget that Nixon was in charge, and Nixon was a strange man. A very intelligent politician, but a man of rather unorthodox initiatives." End quote. Nixon was in charge in 1969, but Operation Gladio had been instituted by Allen Dulles much earlier, and it was financed in large part by the U.S. through the CIA, which Dulles led under Eisenhower and Kennedy, from 1953 to late 1961. The operation kicked into high gear in the late 50s to counter growing leftist movements, especially in Italy. We must assume that is why Paul Tate was in Verona in 1959 with his family. Paul Tate was not just military, he was a colonel in intelligence, which indicates he was probably involved in Gladio. One of these Gladio false flags was the Piazza Fontana bombing of 1969, just a few months after the alleged Tate murders. The bombing was initially attributed to anarchists, violent hippies, you know. But it later came out in testimony that of General Meliti that these bombings were really the work of the CIA, in league with other European intelligence agencies. This indicates that Sharon Tate's own father was capable of organizing false flag events and knew others who could help with whatever needed to be done, including faking deaths and pinning them on leftists. You may think of the Tate murders as just one more Gladio false flag operation against the left. Yes, the Manson murders were an instance of Gladio moving to the US. How did that happen exactly? Well, it happened in 1962 when Paul Tate was transferred from Italy to Fort MacArthur in San Pedro, just south of Torrance and about 20 miles south of Hollywood. It appears that military intelligence may have seen some use for Paul Tate's pretty daughter, and they sent the family back to Los Angeles to put the plan in motion. We assume he was transferred to MacArthur since that was the base in San Pedro. But although the Tate family may have lived in San Pedro, Paul Tate was more likely assigned to Lookout Mountain Base in Laurel Canyon about 25 miles away, which was still secret at the time. Either that or he transferred over there once the operation solidified a few years later. During an interview with Merv Griffin in 1966, Sharon says that her father was stationed in Vietnam at the time. That is possible, but it is more likely to be a cover story. At any rate, they would need him back in Los Angeles by 1967 or 1968 to work on the Great Tate event. As soon as Manson was released in 1967, they must have already begun setting the stage. We have more indication of this from online sources, which admit that Paul Tate dressed up like a hippie after his daughter's alleged murder, allegedly trying to discover who murdered her. But that fact is commonly passed over or misread. It should be a huge red flag. We have an admission that military intelligence had a colonel dressed up as a hippie right after the murders, attempting to infiltrate them. That fact is spun to make us think that Paul Tate was there in his own capacity as a private citizen. But if he was really retired at that point and working as a private citizen, he was breaking the law. Private citizens are not allowed to work in law enforcement, and after the alleged murders, any involvement in the investigation was considered law enforcement. Any private investigators have to be licensed. Of course, the truth is much worse than that, since we should make some attempt to read this fact without the spin. Paul Tate wasn't just acting as some sort of vigilant father. He was doing his job. He wasn't retired. He is said to have died in 2005 at age 82, which would have made him just 46 in 1969. Colonels don't normally retire at 46, since they are only one promotion away from Brigadier General. It is far more likely that he didn't start dressing up as a hippie after the murders. He only got caught dressing up as a hippie after the murders. Someone recognized him, that is, and the CIA had to come up with a cover story to explain it. But he had probably been undercover for months as part of the operation. It is likely he was the one running the whole thing from the hippie side, wearing a beard and tie-dyes. How has everyone managed to miss that for 43 years? Some of the things I discovered for this paper, May Brussel, could not have been expected to know in the 1970s, but any good researcher at the time should have seen Paul Tate as the biggest red flag in all of California. If you don't believe an intelligence colonel would dress up as a hippie and try to infiltrate the movement, try reading the book Acid Dreams, where we find this. Quote, "It was a typical 60s scene. A group of scruffy, long-haired students stood in a circle passing joints and hash pipes. The setting could have been Berkeley, Ann Arbor, or any other hip campus. But these students were actually FBI agents, and the school they attended was known as Hoover University, located at Quantico Marine Base in Virginia. This elite academy specialized in training G-men to penetrate left-wing organizations. To cultivate the proper counterculture image, they were told not to wash or bathe for several days before infiltrating a group of radicals. Refresher courses were also held for FBI agents who had successfully immersed themselves in the drug culture of their respective locales." End quote. And it wasn't just FBI, it was also CIA. It wasn't in Virginia for no reason. Langley was just up the road. Nor is the book Acid Dreams some fringe publication. Look it up on Wikipedia, where we will see it is a respected book widely referenced by the mainstream. The government has long admitted it did these things. Actually, we know Paul Tate wasn't retired on August 9th. We are told he resigned 2 weeks before his scheduled retirement. But both the resignation and scheduled retirement were after the murders. He resigned because of the murder of his daughter, we are told. This by itself is a red flag, since the odds of Paul Tate's retirement being scheduled 2 weeks after August 9th are extremely low. In fact, they are 0, since colonels are not scheduled to retire at age 46. They may take early retirement, but it isn't scheduled. This wording is suspicious, and we must assume it is used only to make a reader think his retirement had already been planned. But if it had been planned, why would he need to resign 2 weeks early? There is no need to resign in such a circumstance, since, given the murder of his daughter, his superiors would no doubt give him leave for those 2 remaining weeks. Again, we are being told he resigned 2 weeks early to give the impression he was not military intelligence when he was dressed up as a hippie. They are trying to divert you from the realization that in any case, we have a military intelligence colonel dressed up as a hippie roaming the streets of LA. Whether he is on leave or resigned or soon to retire is not to the point. He is the same person no matter what. He is a gigantic red flag no matter what. You may want to search Wikipedia for Paul Tate. He isn't there. Although Sharon's mother, Doris, is there. On Doris's page, there is no mention of Paul in the text. Bios normally mention spouses. Sharon's page mentions him, but of course there is no link to him, since he has no page. For more strange links, take a look at this. This young man, Wayne Mall, who dated Sharon's sister Deborah, had a motorcycle accident in November 1970, just 1 year after the murders. But what is interesting is what we learn about Paul Tate. In 1971, Tate was opening Tate Gallery for men's hair design in Rolling Hills. What? Rolling Hills is just west of San Pedro, near Long Beach. It is also just north of the old military base, Fort MacArthur. So we have a clear link between Paul Tate and Jay Sebring. How long had Paul Tate been interested in hair design? Or, more to the point, how long had the CIA been involved in hair design for men? Was Tate's new salon going to be a cover for intelligence? And if so, had Sebring's salon been a cover for intelligence all along? This gives us more indication that Sebring was involved in naval intelligence. In this paper, you will see that Sebring, Paul Tate, Susan Atkins, and Charles Watson all had ties to hair salons. Here's some more interesting photo evidence. Pictures of Paul Tate. Paul Tate, master of disguise. See how he shaved his head and beard for the funeral? Remember, he had been disguised with long hair and a beard after the murders, looking for the killers. But at the funeral, all that is gone. He wants to look as different as possible, not to fool the non-existent killers, but to fool you, any real hippies he may be framing, and any future clients of his hair salon. I included this pic just for fun. What's going on here exactly? Is there anything these guys don't film? Take note of this picture of Paul Tate in his Navy uniform. So he would originally have been Navy intelligence, not Army intelligence. Why does that matter? Because Jay Sebring was also Navy. This gives us another link between Paul Tate and Jay Sebring. They may have both come into intelligence from the Navy. There is another thing linking Paul Tate and Jay Sebring: Roman Polanski and Charles Manson. They were all very short men. While watching the NBC film of the funeral, I noticed that Paul Tate was only about 5'5". Jay Sebring was also around 5'5". Roman Polanski is even shorter, being around 5'3". Charles Manson is also about 5'3". Why would this matter, and what could it indicate? Well, if Paul Tate was in control of this operation, he may have recruited people that were also short. No one likes to give orders to someone towering over him. I suspect one of the qualities they best liked about Manson when they were scouring the local jails in 1967 for a patsy is that he was extremely short. This made it slightly more difficult to build him up into a scary monster, but they easily got around it. I asked some people recently how tall they thought Manson was, and they all said about 6 feet. It is amazing what you can do with the press. Paul Tate used the press to promote Sharon from early on as well. She appeared on the cover of Stars and Stripes magazine in the early 60s, astride a U.S. Army missile. Do you imagine her father didn't know anything about it? Stars and Stripes is the military's own magazine, and it operates from inside the Pentagon. We are told he disapproved, but this is unlikely. For more proof this was all a movie, we can simply ask, where did the Manson family live? The Spawn's Movie Ranch. Wikipedia tells us it was used for filming generally Western-themed movies and television programs. With mountainous terrain, boulder-strewn scenery, and an old Western town set, Spawn Ranch was a versatile filming site for many scripts. That's curious, wouldn't you say? The perpetrators were living on a movie set. We are told that Mr. Spawn allowed the Manson family to move in rent-free in 1968. So nice of him. Then as now, old ranchers just love young hippies to hang around, smoking dope, shagging each other, and creating big piles of trash. Also convenient for the government is that all the buildings and sets were destroyed by a fire in 1970, preventing anyone from doing any forensic work there. I would say the best guess is the CIA was paying Spawn to set up their patsies there. As evidence for that, we find that in April of 1969, one of the lesser and younger Manson girls, Ruth Ann Morehouse, 15 at the time, was arrested and placed in juvenile hall. She was released into the custody of George Spawn, who acted as a foster parent in the eyes of the court. What? Ruth Ann's father, Dean, was not dead, and Spawn was no relation. Nor was he fit to be a foster parent, being in his 80s and legally blind. He was not fit to be a foster parent, but he was fit to be her handler. Someone simply arranged for her to be returned to the set since she was one of the props. Ed Sanders implies this was a measure of the power Manson had, but Manson had no power in juvenile courts. The only bodies that have any power over juvenile courts are federal agencies, either FBI or CIA or DIA. Everything to do with the Spawn Ranch stinks of a big federal operation. By this time, the ranch had turned into a huge magnet for runaways and juvenile delinquents from all over the state, and the mainstream story admits that the LA police were well aware of it. And yet we are supposed to believe nothing was done? Reagan sends in the National Guard to bust up college students making speeches and planting trees. But he and the LA police and the state police leave a huge hippie commune in the LA suburbs alone, even while it is allegedly making porn films, acting as a nudist retreat, harboring underage girls, selling drugs, kidnapping schoolgirls, stealing cars, running motorcycle and dune buggy races, threatening neighbors, storing weapons, giving loud all-night parties, fraternizing with biker gangs and Satanists, and so on? We are expected to believe that all these local agencies are going to not only turn a blind eye to the Spahn Ranch, but return an arrested 15-year-old girl to the premises in the care of Mr. Magoo? I mean, George Spahn? Another curious thing about the Spahn Ranch is that the Transcontinental Development Corporation was buying up property all along the ranch and wanted the Spahn Ranch as well. But rather than sell the otherwise worthless property, which we are led to believe was subsisting on pony rinds, Spahn preferred to keep the place as is, a rent-free haven for ex-cons, junkies, and titty dancers. Spahn's refusal to sell can only be explained once we realize he was getting extremely well paid by the feds to keep the place as a movie set, actors and agents haunt, and center of operations for Project Chaos. At any rate, we have already seen that the Manson family is known to have lived on a movie set. The crime scene was the home of a movie director famous for satanic slasher movies. The prime victim was an actress. At least 2 secondary victims were actors. The lead victim's father was a colonel in military intelligence, but no one ever thought to ask if this was a movie paid for by the government? How difficult is that question to ask? Why did Mae Brussel never get to it? Why is it not to be found in 43 years and millions of pages of research by tens of thousands of people?